All right, welcome back. Let's go ahead and record another podcast episode. Welcome back. So, I was getting ready. My wife and I are headed out to go and buy some cooked chicken and just some financial advice. I know I mix and match different topics on different episodes, but if you're making over six figures a year and you have the potential to be able to make more, and one of the best things that you can do is set a per hour time for yourself. So let's say, for example, you make, divide however much you make in a month and then divide it by 160 and then figure out, if it's $200 an hour. Anything that is less than $200 an hour, even if you have to pay somebody $100 an hour to cut your grass or something, technically, if you look at it mathematically, not emotionally, you're actually making money while somebody is doing that for you. But that's a whole separate topic. Okay, so we're going to buy chicken because we buy chicken for the whole week when it's already cooked, so that way I don't use the most important person in my life, which is my wife, to do $10 an hour job. It's not a good idea to do that. So that's a little bit of advice for you guys if you wanted to make yourselves efficient. Is if your wife, that way she gets to cook, not that she has to cook. And so that way she does it out of love and not out of necessity. And so that's if you have the income potential and you've actually developed your ability to, make money. But anyways, that's besides the point. That's a total distraction from the actual point that we're going to make. So the podcast that we are recording today is the title of the podcast episode is Why Muslims Just Not Following Islam is a Good Thing. And so hear me out on this, and the best audience I always get is my wife or my business partner, anybody who listens to me, and then you guys can give me feedback. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So this is the premise of this. I had this idea and I was like, oh dude, this is a good one. So if you hear a lot of the more traditional Muslims, those who are kind of planning for Islam, and those who say, how are we going to help Islam grow, they will typically say, and if you hear them talk, they will say that the Sahaba were so much better than us because they were told one time, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah, and they followed. And so they were true ibad in the sense that they did not question and they just followed the ahkam of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the ahkam of Islam. And so that is why they were so much better Muslims than we were. Now, I'm not denying that. The Sahaba and the Tabi'een and Tabi'een were the Salafus Salih. They were the best generation. Nobody's denying that. What I'm going to comment on here in a second is more so the comment that what they're doing when those people say that the Sahaba were so good. The problem with us, this is what the problem with this is. They say the second half of this is the issue. The problem with us today as Muslims is that we question and want to know why everything is the way that it is before we actually accept Islam and before we actually do anything. We question too much. And so we put up too many blockages between us just following Islam. Now, I'm not denying that is actually the case, and I'm not denying that is the case. All I'm commenting on is the fact of why that actually happens. Okay? Because I think a lot of people make claims without trying to understand why or the behind the scenes of the claim, right? Because if you're trying to actually help Muslims, what you need to do is you're going to need to understand why they are doing the thing that they are doing. What is the psychological principle? So that way, once you understand why they're doing it, you can then reverse engineer in order to be able to facilitate this. Instead of slapping and beating up and punching the Muslim Ummah today and say that you guys are the problem, you guys put issues in this, you guys just need to follow blindly. The reason why, now here's the kicker of this, okay? Now this is the whole point of all this, okay? The reason why it's a good thing that Muslims are not just blindly following Islam in today's world is because unlike the time of the Sahaba, in today's world we live in not a physical war, we live in an idea war. In today's world, we have so many more isms, communism, socialism, capitalism, whatever ism that you want to call, right? In today's world, we have an entire plethora of ideas that can implant in the mind, and philosophies and methodologies and ideologies that can implant in the mind and grow like cancers. And so the reason why human beings in the modern world have developed a shield to question things before they accept them is actually a good thing. Because if we just blindly accepted any ideology that comes to our minds, it could potentially harm us. So in the time of the Sahaba, there was less ideologies. There was maybe one or two, and you wouldn't have the internet. You didn't have ideologies that were spreading that kind of stuff. Yes, there were ideologies. Kufr was an ideology, right? In the Makkah time, there was ideologies. But it wasn't the way that we have now. For example, the Greek philosophers and the ideas about how capitalism and democracy and these kinds of things should function. Nowadays, the amount of philosophers that have come throughout the time, from the time of the Sahaba until now, There's so many. If you look at how, for example, Plato and Socrates have actually changed the way that like the founding fathers have thought about democracy and all this kind of stuff. And so the reason why Muslims in general, but also human beings in general in the modern world, are extremely questioning of ideologies in general, not just Islam. They're questioning of ideologies in general is actually as a safety mechanism to make sure that what they are actually accepting into their minds is something that is acceptable or something that should be accepted. Versus in the time of the Sahaba, if they had one ideology, which was the ideology of Islam, that was so pure, they accepted it without question and they followed it without question. But in today's world, even within Islam, there have become so many ideologies. Like there was not, like in the time of the Sahaba, there was one ideology and it was the pure from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, exactly how it was. There was no like, let me go ahead and try to have like a different aqidah. There was no, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was alive. The Sahaba, the Tabi'in, Tabi'in, it was one clear, very clear understanding of what Islam was. In today's world, that is not the case. If you, even within Islam, let's say for example, let's not talk about communism and socialism or any other ism, right? Let's just talk about within Islam. Within Islam, you have to question what the Imam is telling you so that way you can actually think whether or not he's actually manipulating what Islam is to be able to feed his own agenda. And so the title of this podcast episode is why it's actually a good thing that Muslims just don't follow Islam blindly. Now, for the sake of clickbait, I'll probably take out the blindly so that way people will listen. But the point being is that instead of people who actually want to help the ummah, who start to unfortunately slap and abuse the ummah and say, you guys are wrong, you guys are bad, Islam, we need to return back to a type of Islam that we just need to follow Islam, we need to be true ibad, we need to actually just listen to Islam. It's not, you're going against the way that the mindset is today. Because if somebody was to follow that person's advice and actually turn off the defense mechanisms that they have in their mind, they would actually be opening up their mind potentially to a lot of damage that would actually harm them more. And so in fact, what's going to end up happening, because the human brain has one purpose and one purpose only, which is to protect yourself from bodily harm and psychological harm, right? That's the purpose of the brain, is that in fact, if you keep telling the Muslim Ummah that, they're not going to be able to do that. And so if you live your entire da'wah life being, the reason the problem with Muslims is that we just don't accept Islam, we don't return to the Quran and Sunnah, and we don't just follow it. If you just spend all of your time talking about that, guess how much change you're going to make? Zero. Because you're going against what is the reality of the situation. And so the better thing to do is to actually spend time to step back and understand the problem better. And so I think it was maybe Albert Einstein or somebody, there's a quote where they said that if they had 1 hour to solve a problem, they would spend 55 minutes understanding the problem first and then 5 minutes actually making the solution. And in fact, most people are doing it the opposite way, is that they're coming up with solutions left and right over and over and over again and not actually taking the step back to understand why is it that we are in the situation that we are in. Whether that be historically, whether that be psychologically, whether that be society-wise, why is it that we are the way that we are? And then designing a solution that is actually with the times, rather than trying to just come up with something out of the blue air or try to take something that's outdated. Or because the truth is, any solution that was even in the time of the Sahaba is not going to necessarily work in the time that we have today. There's a reason why Imam Shafi'i, rahimahullah, when he left Kufa and he went to Masr, which is Egypt, his entire fiqh and his entire ideology changed. Because when you're actually designing solutions, it's not only about the time, but it's also about the people. And so all of those things need to be taken into consideration when you're actually designing solutions that are actually going to work. Boom. Thoughts?
I don't know what to say. There's a lot to take in.
Does it make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. It's just we haven't spent enough time to even understand what the problem is. And I don't think there is no one problem. I think there's so many problems. And so defining each problem and then anyone who's trying to do da'wah or trying to fix the situation of Muslims should just pick one problem and focus on it, even if it only impacts a few people. Or
that's where yes, there's so many problems, so that means that it takes so many step backs in order to actually be able to figure out the root cause behind all of those problems. And that's the thing that most people don't want to do. Most people are not patient enough to be able to step back and dedicate themselves to actually understanding the problem. In fact, instead, they want to be able to measure themselves in terms of how much action did I do. But the truth is that going Jackie Chan mode and trying to do action and saying, we did all this da'wah and we're doing all this stuff, when in reality, 10 years from now, none of that matters, that doesn't actually move the needle forward. You need to be able to take a lot of time back, you need to step back and actually understand what the actual problem is. And so all I'm doing inside of this podcast episode is addressing the root cause behind one issue. And that one issue, I'm not saying this is an issue with all of the issue with communities. I'm saying one issue. And one issue, this is a devil's avocado to those people who say, oh, the problem with the Muslim Ummah is that the Sahaba used to follow, without question, and we question too much. Well, there's a reason to question too much. It's because the time that we live in, which is all that I said, is because of the fact that we live in an ideological war. And so it's harmful for us to be able to follow blindly, even within the context of Islam. Now, that is a reality of the situation that we have. Now, how do you design a solution that actually allows Muslims to come closer to Islam, given the fact that we live in an ideological war era? That is something that is an innovation. That is something that is actual problem solving. That is something that is actual solution solving. But Muslim leaders don't want to think at that level.
It's because we've forgotten that we're all human. Like, we all have like the basic necessities of a human, and we all have just like a normal brain. And so if you understand the mindset of what general population have, you can put Islam in that.
Correct.
Just by understanding how a brain works. Like, Muslim leaders don't talk about prefrontal cortex. Like, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the limbic brain. We talk about, like, we don't relate it to like what we can understand. We say it's the nafs. It's the...
Oh, you bring up a very good point. Actually, this is an addition to this point. You brought up a very good point. I'm happy that you mentioned that. Which was, okay, and somebody might say, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Islam to be universal for all of time. So why would we need, this is a very good point you brought up, why would we need, so what I'm saying is that, hey, we should understand more, we could understand more of how the human brain works, and be able to help Muslims understand why Islam the way it is. However, the counter argument, okay, so now we just made our point. The counter argument that others would say is like, no, but Islam was revealed to be universal. It wasn't meant to be, you have to have the explanation for it. We should follow without having to have the explanation. That's a very valid point. Does that make sense? You're seeing the point? Now here's my counter to the other point. Now I'm going to put devil's avocado to their point. Here's my counter to that, okay? Here's my counter to that. Is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us ilm and access to the ilm according to the difficulties that we have. So the Sahaba did not know anything about, I wouldn't say not anything, but they did not know as much as we know about science and the brain and any of that kind of stuff. And guess what? Their time and the Islam that they had to accept was also the I don't want to say the Islam that they had to accept, more so that their ability to follow Islam without questioning was also as a result of the fact that they did not have the tools to question. Imagine if they had their understanding of science, but then we're in dealing with all of the isms of today. It would be like terrible.
We're talking about like Sahabas, obviously in the time of the Prophet ﷺ,
right? Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and they also had the Prophet ﷺ.
Yes, that's right. Even if you say like Tabi'een then, after the generation after the Sahaba, right? What I'm saying here is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us as Muslims in today's world the tools to be able to then give more explanation to Islam, thereby allowing us to increase our iman because we are explaining Islam given the tools that we had. So for example, the Sahaba interpreted Islam and their understanding of Islam given their understanding of the world at that time. And so their yaqeen came from them understanding Islam through the lens of what it is that they knew about the world. And so because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us more ilm about the world in today's time, about the mind and how the mind works and how humans work, we should then use that ilm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to be able to then understand Islam within that context, within that lens that we understand. And so in the same way that the Sahaba used their understanding of the world to make sense of what Islam was ordering them to do, we as Muslims also could be using the ilm that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us about the dunya to be able to then understand Islam given the world that we live in today. And yet, unfortunately, the Muslim Ummah today wants to insist on using the same level of science that the Sahaba had in order to try and understand Islam into how Islam would relate in today's world.
Which makes no sense because they even tell us, they're like, well, we can never be as good as the Sahabas.
Yeah.
But it's like, then what do you want us to do?
Yeah.
Like, because yes, you can never be as good as the Sahabas, but also you can be the best of today.
Yeah.
Like, we can be the best Muslims of this generation, of this time.
Exactly.
Yeah, we can never be like Sahabas because the Sahabas were on a very different level, very different time, and they were one of the first Muslims. Yeah. So their status, we can never meet that.
Exactly.
But we can still be the best of this time.
Exactly.
And so when they say that, we have to think like the Sahabas, we have to take the Sahabas as role models, yes, you definitely should. But you should not, like, limit yourself that I can't be as good, so why, like...
Right.
Yeah.
And so, like, within that context, we as Muslims are trying, like you said, trying to understand nafs and all this kind of stuff. dude, nafs and how the concept of nafs was developed with Imam Ghazali in like I don't even know how many, I don't know what year exactly, but it was more than 500 years ago.
Yeah.
And so when you think about it in that respect, the science has evolved now. We now understand so much about the mind, and we understand all this kind of stuff, and still we're talking about diseases of the heart, right? Okay, yes, I understand there's a hadith where like when you do a itham and it goes to your heart and all that. Yes, we understand that. We're not negating that, right? There's ilmul ghaib that's involved here. But we're talking about things that we actually understand using your frontal cortex and your limbic system and your reticular activating system, and how Islam actually makes you into a better human being, which allows you to actually perform better in dunya actions when you become a better Muslim.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like if you went to a non-Muslim and you actually said, if Muslims actually understood their Islam and they actually understood that when you pray salah, you make better decisions. Not only you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but salah is the tool for conscience to be able to build the muscle of your frontal cortex. And when you build the muscle of your frontal cortex, you can actually have better decision making, you have better impulse control, you're a more developed human being because you have khushu' in your salah. When you explain it like that, not only do Muslims want to be able to like, yo, I want to pray more salah because it's going to make me a better human being, but then all of a sudden, non-Muslims are like, yo, these people are so much more developed, their frontal cortexes are so much more developed, I want to be able to pray as well.
Yeah, like what Islam does is that, okay, as humans, we all have superpowers.
Yeah.
That's just a fact that you are, as a human, because you have a prefrontal cortex, you have the possibility of having like superpowers in that
Correct,
sense.
yes.
Islam literally takes that superpower and like teaches you how to use it.
Yeah.
It literally teaches you how to have superpowers.
Yeah.
And we have completely negated that. We've completely forgotten that Islam is actually helping you be one of the best.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the whole premise of all of this, is that unfortunately I think the Muslim Ummah as a whole, especially the leaders of the Muslim Ummah, are out here trying to not understand the real issues that are going on, not to actually use their minds to be able to understand the behind the scenes, the behind the curtain of how the Muslim Ummah got to where we are today. And they're trying to take outdated advice, outdated kind of just like quotes on the wall, right? Like it's nice. It's like almost like a Disneyland movie, you know? It's like, it makes sense to the general population when you say, the Sahaba, they just followed, they didn't question. And so that's the problem with the Muslim Ummah today. It's a nice zinger. It's a nice buzzword. It's a nice buzz phrase that will make sense to the vast majority of the population, but it doesn't actually solve anything. Right? In the same way, like I've been very vocal about how they say that, the reason why Muslim communities are the way that we are is because we have forgotten getting close to the Quran and the Sunnah. It's a nice zinger, it's a nice buzzword, it's a nice phrase, it's a nice like kind of theme and a motto, right? It's kind of like a nice like, oh, okay, so now we can all get closer to the Quran and Sunnah, then all of a sudden we're gonna be better. But that does not negate the fact that there are actual socio-economic issues that need to be addressed in order for us to be able to get closer to Islam. Right? I remember so many years of my adulthood in my growing up from age 13 to age 25, I spent my time thinking that the reason why the Orlando Muslim community was the way that it was because of the fact that we were not close to the Quran and the Sunnah. When in reality, if you zoom out a little bit, yes, that's possibly one issue with it, but if you zoom out, it also has to do with the socio-economic factors of why the economy of the Orlando is built off of tourism and medicine, because there's a lot of elderly. So what kind of community do you think doctors are going to make when they don't have any organizational experience?
Yeah.
Right? And so if you spent your entire life in Orlando saying the reason why the Islamic community is the way that it is simply because of the fact that we're far from the Quran and Sunnah, well, guess what? It's not just if the entire masjid of doctors got close to the Quran and Sunnah, all of a sudden they were going to understand how to build an organization.
Yeah. Not true.
Right? The reason why the Dallas community is so different than the Houston community is because Dallas has the highest per capita Fortune 500 headquarters in the country. All of the people who are running the masajid in Dallas are managers and head organization leaders within organizations.
Yeah.
And so is it because all of a sudden that Dallas community is closer to the Quran and Sunnah, that's why they're more organized than Orlando?
No.
It's silly to say that.
Yeah.
Right? And so the reason why Houston's community is not the same as Dallas is because Houston's community's economy is based off of oil and based off of a very different, so that the generation is significantly older in Houston.
Yeah.
And so that's why you go there and you have a more traditional mindset of people who just want to go to let's go out and do khuruj, let's go to Jamaat and this kind of stuff, is because that's the level of talent that exists within that organization.
That's a really good point.
You see?
Yeah.
And so it's not like, oh, let's just get closer to the Quran and Sunnah and all of a sudden Islam's problems are going to be fixed. No, there are larger factors at play. Now, I'm not negating that we should all get closer to Quran and Sunnah.
Of course, yeah.
But when the leaders come out and say, oh, this is the issue, this is the problem, right? This is what we need to do. You're misdirecting the resources and the focus of the population because of the fact that you got a nice Disneyland, motto that everybody can be like, yeah, that's the issue. The issue is because we're not close to the Quran and Sunnah. The issue is that we are the issue is that we are not today we just question Islam. We don't follow the way that we should, the way that Sahaba did. It's all just buzzwords without actually understanding behind the scenes of what the real issue actually is.
Yeah, and we're a big community of just understanding or believing that reminders are everything. We just keep reminding, but there's no difference, there's no action, there's no problem solving, there's no getting to the root cause, and it's just literally generic reminders sent out, and we're like, okay, we're all improving as a Muslim community.
Because you cannot improve that which you do not know the problem is.
Exactly.
If you do not actually diagnose the actual problem, you cannot improve anything. Right? And so in order to actually diagnose the problem, you have to have a very deep, comprehensive understanding of why the people are the way that they are. And this requires what I call an interdisciplinary approach. And I remember, I don't know who it was, but I picked this up when I was young, it might have been, I don't know who my mentor was at this time. Somebody told me, I don't know, it might have been like a Warren Buffett or somebody like that, where they said that in the modern world, those who approach life from an interdisciplinary approach will master everything. Because in the world that we live in today, there's so much information. If you look back at like Khawarizmi and Al-Jabra and all these people who were back in the day, like even if you look at Leonardo da Vinci, he was like an artist, he was like a scientist, and he was like all these different things. You have to approach problem solving from an interdisciplinary standpoint and understand, okay, let's figure out why is Dallas's community so much better than Orlando's community. Okay, well, we got to first look at it from a socioeconomic standpoint. We got to look at it from an economy standpoint. We got to look at it from a geography standpoint. We got to look at it from a historical standpoint. There's so many different layers that we need to look at this on, and we need to be able to approach it and have an understanding of each of those layers. And so if we don't understand how history works, if we don't understand how the economy works, if we don't understand how money works, if we don't understand how people work in general, then we will not be able to actually diagnose the problem. And so it requires a lot of understanding from many different types of fields of knowledge to properly diagnose a problem. Boom. So that's what I had just as there you go. I just wanted to share this with everybody. That is what a thought process I had earlier today. We're going to go inside and get our chicken. And so random thoughts with Yasin and the missus on the way to get chicken. There you go. That's what we call this on a Sunday evening. With that being said, everyone, we're going to check out, and hope you guys got value out of that. Hope that was in some way, shape, or form helpful. And we'll talk again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.